Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for tonight's presentation of Little Matches, an inspirational story on discovering your purpose in life. And we're here tonight with author Maryanne O'Hara, who will discuss her recent book, Little Matches, a memoir of finding light in the dark. Maryanne is the author, most recently, of Little Matches. Little Matches is inspired by a blog that Maryanne kept while her daughter Caitlin was waiting for a lung transplant. Maryanne and Caitlin's story has been featured in the New York Times, Time Magazine, the Boston Globe, Psychology Today, and Little Matches is a People Magazine Book of the Week. Maryanne is also the author of Cascade, which is a novel, which was the Boston Globe Book Club's inaugural pick, a finalist for the Mass Book Award, and also a People Magazine Book of the Week. Maryanne holds an MFA in creative writing, has taught creative writing at the college level, and was a longtime editor at the literary journal Plowshares. I knew I was going to get that wrong, Maryanne. After volunteering as an end-of-life volunteer at care facilities in Boston and Pittsburgh, she trained as a certified end-of-life doula at the University of Vermont's Lerner College of Medicine in 2019. Maryanne lectures on topics including chronic illness, bereavement, and secular spirituality. There's another word I can't say. She is the developer of a successful legacy writing workshop that facilitates personal and communal reflective creative practices across identity, age, and health status. So all 60 plus of us, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Maryanne for joining us here tonight. And Maryanne, you can take it away.
I will take it away.
Great.
Thank you so much, Robert. And thank you, all the libraries who are part of this. And thank you, Wellesley Books. I love you. I was just at Wellesley Books moderating with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago. I wish I could see you all. I love speaking in person, but I'm really grateful that we have Zoom during a pandemic. And so I'm going to imagine that I see you all out there. I'm a really big fan of visuals when I speak, and especially during Zoom, I found it to be important. So I've prepared a presentation, and I'm going to hide myself while I show it and tell the story. And I would love you to just focus on the story I tell and the pictures I show. So here we go. And we're going to start with a little video that gives you a taste of the spirit of my book. After I lost my daughter, Caitlin, I looked for revelation. I became every human who has ever looked for answers to the hard questions. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? Does consciousness survive death? Does my existence serve any real purpose? Does anyone's? So I wrote Little Matches from inside real-time grief, and I asked those big life questions. Caitlin became a real sage for all of us. She had so much wisdom. And the last couple of years, while she was waiting for her lung transplant and she was on oxygen, it was easier to write than to speak. After her passing, many of her friends shared her writing with me, including text messages, conversations that would have been lost forever were recorded. So all of her old soul wisdom is in the book in a really cool way. I know I'm not the first person to lose what's most important to me. Humans lose all the time, and lose hard. Little Matches is for anyone who loses and asks, now what? So this is a snapshot in time of who I used to be not very long ago. Wife, mother, author. We were celebrating the release of my novel Cascade here. And what you can't see in the photograph is the story that was happening underneath.
At the time, I was firmly a writer of fiction, the made up. At my first writing workshop years ago, when the leader heard about my 2-year-old's life-threatening illness, he said, "You should be writing your pain." I had no interest in writing pain. Fiction was a way to escape. Inside an invented situation with made-up people, I could forget for a little while Caitlin's health and how it could tick-tock from well to crisis mode overnight. But one day the clock stopped and the world went very dark. I'm going to read the very first page of Little Matches. It's as horrible as I knew it would be. It is silent internal hysteria, and it is unbearable. People say, "I can't imagine." And I think, really? You can't imagine? Maybe having healthy children protects you from letting your mind go to the darkest places. One friend says, "I'm so sorry. I don't know how you can close your eyes at night." Here's how I do it. I close my eyes. I ask the universe to give me an hour of unconsciousness. Somehow it works. I'm learning to talk to the universe. I think I can bear it if I know I will see her again. I nonstop devour the kinds of books she and I sometimes liked to read and discuss. I call them soul books. We Don't Die, Many Lives, Many Masters, The Light Between Us. These particular books are intelligently written, credible, and they provide some comfort in the moment. Yes, they say, we birth into this life knowing at a soul level our life's plan. Yes, there is more to life than this life. When I close them, I'm a frantic human mother again, sick with doubt and grief. In the beginning, I was a very reluctant mother-to-be. I had grown up the oldest of 6 children in a chaotic household with way too much childcare left to me. I knew kids took away your freedom. I had no desire for my own. But I married young and immediately, very unexpectedly, found myself pregnant. I was okay with it, although I did worry I might not bond with the baby. But the parenting books told me not to worry about that not everyone bonds right away. So I stopped worrying. I was young. I definitely didn't worry about whether the baby would be healthy. When she was born, they scooped her away and weighed her, and the whole time she screamed. She was still crying when the nurse placed her on my chest. I said, "Hi, Caitlin." She stopped crying and went very still, as if she were listening. "She knows who you are," said the nurse. She knew who I was. The miracle of that. I fell in love on the spot. It was immediate, and it was forever. We were lucky. From the beginning, we clicked, got along really well. And for the first 2 years of her life, she was like any kid, except she would get a lot of colds. Too many. They didn't make sense to me until finally, a pneumonia at age 2 that landed her in the hospital led to the diagnosis. She had cystic fibrosis, which is an invisible genetic disease that predisposes people who have it to serious infections that destroy the lungs over time. There were few treatments, no cure, just a very uncertain prognosis. She could live a long life, the doctor said, or she could be gone by Christmas. They honestly didn't know. These are my journals from those days, and they are full of the details. The grief so heavy, it hurt to breathe. The belief that we could not possibly ever be happy again. This photo of me was taken right after her diagnosis at a child's birthday party. I was in such pain, but you can't tell from this picture. So much of human suffering is invisible. We are often alone with it. Our family learned to adapt the way we humans do. We learned to live with the chronic uncertainty, the daily treatments, the unexpected emergencies. And very early on, I began to compartmentalize, to put CF in a box. I had a saying, let's not ruin today, worrying about tomorrow. Every day we did everything humanly possible to keep Caitlin healthy. But if we weren't in crisis mode, we tuned CF out. Living with this perspective meant that Caitlin didn't define herself by her disease. And it meant that I was forced to live not in the past where I couldn't change anything, and certainly not in the unpredictable future. I learned to hang out in the moment and to really think about what life was for in the first place and what it would mean to raise a child who would know that life is precarious and temporary. I wrestled with what to believe in during those years. I felt myself to be an agnostic with a lot of questions. Since childhood, I had had a singular thought in the back of my mind. We find ourselves here. We humans find ourselves alive with no explanation. Long ago, we emerged from our caves and turned so much of the natural world into everything that we now take for granted. But essentially, we are simple. We are cycle after cycle of creatures who are born, who live, and who die. That's a comprehension that can be stark for anyone, never mind a child. So we made sure that Caitlin never felt alone and that we helped her lean into the magic of our brief human existence. We exposed her to art and books and music and travel, the good in this life. If she woke in the night coughing, I would say, let's see which stars are out tonight. We raised her to honor the good in all religions, to keep an open mind, and to always, always question what didn't resonate with her soul. I probably needn't have worried. Caitlin's North Star was always, instinctively, goodness. Even as the smallest kid, she was always kind in a way I was not when I was young. And I always marveled at that. Where had that goodness come from? In the fire that was there from the beginning. And there was fire, thank goodness. She was a rebel and a champion of underdogs, and I was grateful to see that she had grit and the ability to face whatever would need facing. I got comfortable with CF. I began to do that very human thing. I began to feel like I had control over it. If I continued to take good care of her, do everything right, well, then maybe she would be one of those CF people who grew old and didn't struggle too much. They existed. So life in our little house began to feel safe again, and we went back to being the kinds of people that truly bad things couldn't really happen to. She was 11 when a routine X-ray revealed that a bacteria was destroying the lower lobe of her left lung. Left unchecked, the bacteria would spread and ultimately kill her. The only way to try and save her was with a lobectomy, Frankenstein language, major surgery that would cut away the ruined lobe and hopefully stop the spread. During the lead up to surgery, I could barely tolerate living inside my skin. Of course, all my control had been an illusion. I had to depend on other people to save her, and the outcome was uncertain. When I was alone in my house, I did things like cling to door jambs and scream. I lay on the living room sofa, staring at the ceiling and sobbing. It was on that sofa, one bright winter morning, that I heard a voice, strong and quite clear, a low female voice off to my left. It said, "Have faith." I sat up and blinked and looked around at the furniture, the bookshelves, the windows, the doors. I've never doubted that I heard that voice, those words. But for many years, I wondered if I had experienced what the neurologist Oliver Sacks called auditory hallucinations. He had declared them to be an ultimate safeguard built into the brain. The lobectomy was a cautious success, the surgeon pretty sure that he had cut away all the infected tissue. But post-op, her lung refused to heal. Months passed as she lay trapped in a hospital bed, attached to a suctioning device that kept a steady vacuum pressure on her lung to keep it inflated and help it heal. From her 9th floor room, she could see ball games at Fenway Park, and one night, 4th of July fireworks. Caitlin always said she stopped being a kid that year. In my own journal, I wrote, "If she dies, I can kill myself." It felt like a plan, the only thing I could control. Sometimes I thought of the voice telling me to have faith, but after a while, I couldn't muster any. Then, after 5 months of this, her surgeon walked into the room with a big thumbs up one day. "Caitlin," he said, "I can't explain it, but your lung has healed." We returned to our lives, but living had become both more precious and more fraught. 6 months could go by uneventfully, but now we knew it could change overnight, and many times it did. Illnesses forced her to transfer from college in Washington back home to Boston, and we learned to never bank on anything planned beyond today. But that was okay. Todays are really good. We all received a today this morning, and sometimes you just have to hold on to the miracle of that because it is not a given. Like so many people who live with serious health issues, Caitlin grew increasingly reflective. We talked a lot about life's bigger issues, and she often joked that if she hadn't had CF, she might have been shallow, which was her modest way of pointing out that she didn't think she was special. It was just that having to face your mortality makes you look at life and the world with a much broader and deeper perspective. Writing to a school friend she reconnected with later in life, she talked about how tricky her 20s had been when she began needing oxygen to sleep or fly in an airplane, or when she was sick. "It wasn't so bad that I couldn't fake it and kind of live normally," she wrote, "but I also couldn't strike out and do something bold. It really was this constant picking and choosing of battles, fun, etc." To the outside world, she still looked completely healthy. She lived independently, had a design career, a serious boyfriend, but her lung function slowly declined. Normal lung function is generally around 100%. Here, she was at about 30%. That's invisible illness right there, embodied in Caitlin. I always try to remind myself that invisible illnesses of all kinds are everywhere. You really never know what someone else is holding. During these years, Caitlin stumbled across the research into reincarnation that scholars at the University of Virginia have been doing for decades. What interested her most, she wrote, was the idea that we are here to learn lessons in this life, figure out what those lessons are, be good people, and evolve our souls. She began reading the philosophers more closely, especially interested in people who were, as she said, intelligent and intellectual, and yet still very religious. She kept Tolstoy's A Confession bedside and read it many times over the years, bolstered by his ultimate acceptance of the paradox of faith. We talked about the concept of surrender and how the moments when she felt most free, most okay with whatever was happening, and least anxious were those moments when she was able to let go. She applied to a Master of Philosophy program and came close to enrolling until she realized that it didn't make a whole lot of sense to do so when it was clear her health was in serious decline. These photos marked the last day she ever went out into the world without supplemental oxygen. Within hours of them being taken, she was in the ER. She had reached the point that she needed a lung transplant, and we entered into the limbo of waiting for an organ donor. For a bunch of reasons, we had to leave our home in Boston and move to Pittsburgh to wait for surgery. Having to move to another city where we knew no one indefinitely was tough, tougher than this smile of hers makes it look. Her little dog, Henry, was her constant companion, as was I, the primary caregiver she now needed. Her boyfriend and her dad flew in whenever they could. We hoped the transplant would happen within a few months. And we had every reason to believe that once she did receive her surgery, she would survive it. The word waiting sounds passive, but every single day of waiting for an organ donor, a candidate has to work hard to keep herself healthy and fit so she can survive the most major kind of surgery a human being can undergo. Replacing your lungs. Think about it. Waiting takes a terrible toll, and organ donation is not a given. She was at the 2.5-year wait mark here and really struggling, in need of an exponential amount of the supplemental oxygen she had required at the beginning of the wait. She needed help to walk, to shower. This December day would be the last time she would ever see her beloved little Henry. Because in the end, everything that could go wrong did. She existed, and then she did not. We people take up space, and when we're gone, there is a void. There is no rudder in that void, no anchor, no sail, no purpose. You are alone in it. I didn't think I would be able to live. All the terrifying images of how life might be without her, all that I had managed to squeeze out of my head for years had become reality. And reality was unbearable. The only thing that helped was writing. On a blog I had kept during the wait in Pittsburgh, I wrote true things, unsentimental, honest things. And when I was writing, I didn't feel alone. I felt connected to other people and to Caitlin herself. I shared her writings and my own. I wrote about how all I could do was flop from one surface to another and cry. That on the outside, I might have looked like I was functioning, but inside, I knew I would happily die. I wasn't all despair and warning, not at all. I wrote about our lifelong friendship, about our love of travel, and how we had lived on laughter, that great release valve, especially in the hospital. And I wrote about all that reflecting we had done on the reason anyone was alive in the first place. Writing on the blog was a way of grieving out loud, grieving in a way that other people apparently wanted to hear. I received a lot of messages from strangers who said that reading my stories made them feel like they weren't alone and helped them cope. They asked me to write a book. And 9 months to the day after her death, during a walk around Walden Pond, I realized that writing the personal had become necessary. I had no desire to write a book about grief, about cystic fibrosis. In my fiction, I had always explored existential themes. So with this memoir, I wanted to record in real time my search for answers. I wanted anyone reading it to understand how it was. And if they were going through something hard, to feel validated, to be able to say, yes, this is how it is, and to know they weren't alone. And for readers who weren't struggling, I knew Caitlin's story could uplift and inspire them. I was also conscious of the tendency of human memory to beatify a person in the years after death. So I didn't want to wait. I wanted to write Caitlin as she really was, write our story as it really had been. Who she was in real life was splendid enough. I wanted to share her wisdom, her wicked sense of humor, her example. I wanted to write a book that would keep every good thing about her alive. In the beginning stages, it felt impossible. It took me 2 months to write 10 pages. Then I began to set a timer and write for half an hour each day. The book became a book. It became my purpose for living. And as I wrote, I really did become every human who has ever looked for answers to those big life questions inside of books and science and in the natural world. My writing really did become a recounting of that search. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? Does my existence have any real purpose? Does anyone's? The thought of any part of Caitlin existing beyond the physical death of the body seemed desperate. Wishful thinking. I knew what I was, a vulnerable, grieving mother. But what happened was that I kept receiving what seemed to be signs. Hawks, in particular, began behaving in ways I had never witnessed, perching on the roof of my house to fly right over my head when I opened the door, veering so close to my windshield that I would have to jerk the wheel. Caitlin was 33, and I began seeing 33 and 333 everywhere. On clocks, when I looked at them, 33 minutes or 33 miles to every destination. Her Instagram account, 333 posts. Facebook, 1,333 friends. Her boyfriend's street address in Maine, 33. I reasoned that if you begin to look for things, you see them. You look for your husband's red jacket in an airport crowd, and your eyes see all the red there is to see. I was well aware that my antenna was up, ready to notice the slightest meaningful coincidence. I must be unconsciously looking for 333, I would tell myself, just as it whizzed past on a license plate. And sometimes even found a way to say hi. Synchronicities continued nonstop. Visiting a tarot reader in Los Angeles and pulling the Ace of Cups, the card of love and renewal and rebirth, then walking directly into a tiny boutique across the street where a single t-shirt was for sale, folded to reveal the Ace of Cups imagery I had just held in my palm, and where a customer stood spelling out her name for the cashier, Caitlin. Synchronicities that I originally dismissed as coincidences or odd occurrences began to pile up to the point that I realized that discounting them was a bit myopic. And when I shared these stories, the most unlikely people would share back. The cat that dropped dead, literally, during a colleague's mother's funeral, and the random stranger who stopped the daughter years later and said, "I'm supposed to tell you, your mother's fine. The cat's with her." Nurses who tend to the dying will tell you that end-of-life dreams and visions are part of the natural dying experience, always have been. The mother who says to her family gathered round, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but my sister's here." The way Steve Jobs looked past his loved ones and said, "Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow." So many unlikely people shared stories and shared them with such relief that I was taking them seriously that I thought, there's more to all this than most people are talking about. So I began to read the science community's explorations of the source of consciousness. I braced myself, thinking there would be hard proof that consciousness could not survive the death of the body. Instead, I discovered that science calls consciousness the hard problem. What was clear was that many people throughout time have experienced unexplainable phenomena. 100 years ago, a man named Eden Philpotts wrote, "The universe is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper." So much of what we take for granted is made of discoveries that would have seemed completely fantastical, even frightening not very long ago. Here is what I came to know. Synchronicities exist. Regardless of what you believe to be the source of synchronicities, the really marvelous thing is they do exist, and they're fun. They're part of the magic of this life we find ourselves living. I'm going to share a little story from my book. First, I'm going to take a drink of water. This is a view of Martha's Vineyard, which is one of Caitlin's favorite places on earth. It was the summer after her passing, and I was morose. I went by myself to the far end of the island down Lobsterville Road, which you see here. It's this skinny stretch of pavement. I wanted to reenact the last time Caitlin and I were on island, and we had driven all the way out there. It's nice, so quiet. You don't usually see any other people. I decided to drive to the end, like I had with Caitlin that day, where the road stops abruptly at a boat ramp. I started talking to her in my head, saying things like, what the heck? Where are you? Why can't I communicate with you if you're really out there? But I knew why. Because she wasn't out there. She was gone. I would never see her again. I loved you from the first minute, I said out loud, and I was crying by that point. No one will ever call me mom again. I turned into the dead-end area where the road stopped at the water, and there he was, a guy who was all by himself out there carrying a burlap bag with 3 big red letters on its side, an acronym, 3 red letters that spelled mom. Synchronicities exist, and they can comfort you. Use them. Play a game of what if with them. If that really did happen for a reason, what meaning does it have for me? Look for meaning. Make meaning. When you live with a serious disease like Caitlin did, or love a child who has a decreased life expectancy like I did, you don't take life for granted. Caitlin is partly a co-author of Little Matches. She knew to seize all the joy and goodness out of life that she could. So she speaks from inside the pages via emails, blog posts, and text messages that she wrote to share her musings on life and living with chronic illness, on the difficulties and joys of being human. Being mindful of one's mortality like that, it's a kind of a gift. In an email that she wrote to her boyfriend, Andrew, she said, I always pull back and picture myself in time and in space geographically. It makes me removed enough to ultimately feel that there is not much I can do to change the shifts of the world, but also inspired enough to think, what is my role in this lifetime? I have come to believe that it's not happiness we should be seeking, but purpose. That purpose in life is necessary and probably a prerequisite to joy and contentment. For the last 2.5 years of her life, when she couldn't do much physically, Caitlin worked remotely and tirelessly to try and save the world-renowned hospital healing garden at Boston Children's Hospital. That experience made her resolve to get a Master of Public Health degree after her transplant. She also planned to go to Kenya with her best friend, Jess, who had been visiting there for years, doing volunteer work with kids. Now here's where real life gets a little crazy. Like you can't make this up, kind of crazy. So here's a photo of Caitlin and Jess back in the day. They went to the same high school. They both graduated from Boston College. Anyone on the outside looking at the two of them would have thought, lucky, no problems, no worries. But while Caitlin was waiting for her transplant, Jess ran a marathon and found a lump in her breast. She was 31 years old. It was stage 3 breast cancer. Suddenly, Jess was thrown into the world of hospitals and uncertainty too. Now, this is summer of 2016, the last summer of Caitlin's life. Jess's face is full from chemo. Caitlin is on oxygen. On this very day, Jess later told me, Caitlin told Jess she feared that her purpose in life might be to die in order to teach lessons to others. At her funeral, Jess vowed to do something extraordinary in Caitlin's name, and she has. Jess is in remission, but remains on oral chemo and must fly home to the US to see her oncology team every 12 weeks. Yet in 2018, she began fundraising to create this resource center for children in Kenya in Caitlin's name. The Leo Project in honor of Maryanne O'Hara opened in January 2020 and almost immediately had to pivot to help the community deal with COVID. Jess saw that there was a great need for a community health center for women and children. And the Maryanne O'Hara Community Health Clinic for maternal and child care is under construction and due to open by the end of this summer. That's friendship. That's love. That's finding meaning and purpose in life. Caitlin wanted to do some good in this world and get her Master of Public Health. And in a way, she has. I have found meaning and purpose through my books, through storytelling and speaking, In addition to this talk, I speak to hospital grand rounds programs and caregiving groups around the country about why medicine needs memoir, needs the empathy that hearing people's stories instills in people. And as she did in life, Caitlin's wisdom and strength sustain me. In the book, I recount an instance when I was fretting about my career and my sense that I hadn't done enough with my life, and I was going on, and Caitlin was like, "Oh, Mom, don't you get it? You think all this is important, but all that really matters is loving people and being kind." Those words on their own can look simplistic, but really, at the end of life, what else will really matter? In the last message she ever sent out to loved ones from her hospital bed, Caitlin wrote, "I want to reassure you, I don't take myself too seriously. I do take life seriously, though. I'll be honest, because it's a seriously wild business." It is a seriously wild business. She loved being alive. She did not want to leave. But she also knew this, that we are all temporary. The gift of cystic fibrosis was that she never lost sight of her mortality. She had a wonderful life. We will always grieve Caitlin because we love her so much. Grief doesn't go away. It exists on the spectrum of love. Most of us possess a wonderful human ability to remember. That is a gift. So all of us who love Caitlin, we talk about her, we cry, we laugh, we keep her close and feel her presence. Caitlin believed that faith is a choice. And it's true. Faith in anything is the great paradox. It can only be a choice. I can view life as random and often quite cruel, or I can choose to live as if there is more to life than this life, and that somehow, in a way that no one can explain or disprove, consciousness endures and meaning is a real thing. That we come to this life with some kind of rough map, with familiar guideposts along the way and wiggle room to make choices. Life itself is so magical that it's really not that much of a stretch to imagine that there is at least one other level higher than this particular reality of a lifespan on Earth. But here's something I want to leave you with. Regardless of what we believe or think we believe, it can be instructive to take a moment to just imagine it's true that we chose these lives, planned these courses of events in order to challenge ourselves to grow. Can we look back on our lives and pick out which events tested us in such a way that we can be grateful for them? Figure out the challenges we might have set for ourselves? Set our feet more solidly on the path that resonates with our soul? The next time you experience the unexplained magic of a synchronicity, I invite you to reflect on that. And that's normally where I end, but because I talked about Jess in the Leo Project, I'm going to show you a photo of us. We went to Kenya. It was the 5th anniversary of Caitlin's passing last December. 5 years goes by in such a blink. And the only meaningful thing to do seemed to be to go and see the Leo Project for ourselves. And so we did, and it was quite wonderful. Thank you.
So Maryanne, wonderful job, very powerful. Folks, if you have any comments or questions for Maryanne, please get your comments into the chat and your questions into the Q&A, and we'll go for another 10 to 15 minutes. Rosamond says, such a harrowing story. Thank you for sharing. Barbara with a quote, we are all just walking each other home. And she thanks you and Caitlin for your gifts. Michelle asks, was there any situation of this magnitude that you had endured before that maybe gave you such resilience? And was it family support that assisted you throughout?
Good question. Certainly when she was diagnosed, when that doctor said it was August and he said she could be gone by Christmas, that was devastating. So that was the most devastating thing that had ever happened to me at that point in my life. I loved her so much. It was completely unbearable. Anyone who loves somebody or a child or a pet knows how that feels. And then when she, we got comfortable, and then when she was 11, we came close to losing her. And that was horrible. So yes, it all does build resilience over time. And I really did learn to compartmentalize and really try to live in the moment. So if we weren't in crisis mode, I didn't even want to think about tomorrow. We did everything possible, like every day, her physical therapy, her medicines, you name it, we did it. But other than that, we just lived life. Because I say in the book at one point, there was this man not long after Caitlin's passing who put his arm around Nick. He was the same age as my husband. And he said, oh, pal, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine. And that very night, that man had a heart attack in his sleep and died. So, I always say, like, don't feel sorry for me. Just if you can take my story and use it to make you, live your best life and appreciate your moments, that will make me happy. And as I say, Caitlin's story is a story of, Caitlin is the resilient one, man. She never complained. I don't know how she never complained, because she just, so many of her friends, and she had some really super close friends, as you can see by like Jess, amazing Jess, after reading Little Matches said, God, Caitlin, like she just never let on just how bad it was. Mm-hmm. And she was quite the person.
Mary says, as a person whose family has dealt with CF, I thank you for this. Gail says that you choked her up. She thanks you for your presentation. Susanna asks, could you speak a little more to your exploration of scientific studies on reincarnation? Did Caitlin have past life memories at any time during her life? And have you?
Yes. So I talk in the book about that, how one day I just felt it was totally by chance. I came across a woman reading Dr. Brian Weiss's Little Matches, Dr. Brian Weiss's Many Lives, Many Masters. And I heard about it, and I only read it because he had credentials from, Yale and Columbia, and he was a medical doctor, and he had come very reluctantly to the study of past life regression. And it was around the time Caitlin was starting to decline. She started needing oxygen. And so I found the book to be quite believable and comforting. So I gave it to her for comfort at the very least. And then about 2 years later, I read that he was going to be up in Andover doing like a conference. And so I decided to take her, and I knew it would be a risk, because if he wasn't for real, we would just know, like we would, that knowing you have, we would just know. But we went, and if anything, he was more real than real. He was actually a tiny bit boring, but I liked that. He wasn't like a showman with tricks. He was gentle and methodical in his explanations. And anyway, we did some regressions then, and Caitlin had always had this fear of her neck. She didn't like anything around her neck. And she had this vision of being like 1200, 1300s, being with a man who, she had hair that had never been cut down to her legs, and him just grabbing her and snapping her neck, and then rising above her body and looking down and seeing it. And she was like, I could have made that up. But it felt very powerful, and it explained her lifelong neck problems. And also in the book, I talk a lot about different things she explored and how much they resonated. And again, the University of Virginia reincarnation research is it's hard. It's a slog to read through, because it's very boring, and they're trying to discredit the stories. Like, they're not just easily saying, oh yeah, this is true. They're trying to discredit them because they are scholars.
Joyce says, wow, what a wonderful story. Can Maryanne please explain more about CF? I need to learn more.
Well, there are great resources online. You can go to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. The Cystic Fibrosis Research Institute in California is really good as well. It's a genetic disease. you have to get a copy of the bad gene from each parent, but it's autosomal recessive. So I never knew I was a carrier. My husband never knew he was a carrier. As long as you have one normal gene, you don't have the disease. But if you get 2 copies of the bad gene, you have the disease. And it's primarily a lung disease. It has to do with salt transport through cell walls, and it makes mucus anywhere where you would create mucus. Instead of being thin and slippery and sterile, it's thick and sticky and harbors bacteria that cause infections over time. And once lung tissue is destroyed, it doesn't regenerate, it's destroyed. So it's a progressive disease, and CF is hard because it affects everybody differently. And also right now, there are some really wonderful treatments for it. Caitlin was actually able to take one of the medicines that did in fact correct her genetic defect, but it came too late for her. Her lungs were already too damaged. But if she was born now and she was able to have the Vertex drug that she was taking, it would be a totally different story. But I recommend that you look at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. They are a great source of information.
So folks, we're going to take 5 more minutes of questions here and comments. Diana says, thank you for your wise and beautiful words. Thank you for sharing this with us. Michelle says, thank you for sharing this presentation. Teresa says, thank you for sharing this difficult yet beautiful story. Caitlin lived more in her 33 years than many people do. Well said. Malini asks, or she says, thank you so much. One question: for someone who is struggling to find purpose, especially I feel like we are all cogs in the wheel, do you have any suggestions?
I do, and that is such a good question. And it's so easy to feel that way. And I've certainly felt that way myself. And what I've come up with is, certainly I lost my child. I've got a big purpose. Jess had cancer, lost her best friend. She's got a big purpose, but purpose can be small. I have found in my life, and I've been volunteering since I was a teenager, I find that doing something that helps other people just makes you feel better and gives you that sense of purpose. And, like Caitlin said, all that really matters is loving people. And all of the sages throughout history have said that. Really, love is what really matters. It sounds like a Hallmark card, but it's true. Nothing really matters. Without other people, what are we? So I often think that if there's something that you really love, it's something that fills you with joy and you love to do it, why not take that thing that you love and somehow find a way to share it with others? So that could be teaching a class like at a community center. It could be baking cookies for the senior center. It could be doing something that you love that just shares that love a little bit. And I think just a small, there are days when I remember when Caitlin was young and sick and I was in grad school, I did this thing where I drove the elderly like maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. But on those days when I did it, I just felt so much better. And I remember saying to a friend of mine who's a wonderful writer, she's published like 5 books by now, and she just said, I said, what's your favorite kind of day? And she said, definitely a day of writing. And it's true. And I know that feeling. But I said that day, and I knew it to be true. I said, a day when I volunteered is my favorite kind of day. So, and yes, Mary Beth, I'm seeing that. I'm reading the comments too. The Beatles, yeah of course they had it right. John Lennon, he knew.
So Mary Beth says, at the risk of sounding campy,
Yeah.
the Beatles had it right. Love is all you need. Barbara says, thank you for your strength and bravery and for sharing your very moving and heartfelt story. Alex says, thank you so much for bringing purpose back into my focus. Let's touch on your husband a little bit there. Kathleen wants to know, did your husband process grief similarly?
No, my husband grew up in Ireland, and in Ireland, they tended to do 2 things when somebody died. Turn them into a saint, put them up on the wall with the vigil light, and then not talk about them. It was too painful, can't talk about them. So when my husband, when we were young, his 29-year-old brother happened to have a brain aneurysm and he died here in the United States. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. He left behind a beautiful little baby and a wife, and his mother never again came to the United States And, you know, that was years ago now. And it was too painful for her. She couldn't face the pain. And yet, on the other hand, she kept herself from seeing her other grandchild and her other son. So it never really made sense to me. I mean, I understood it, but my husband, he saw the flaws in that, and he's become, over the years, much better about processing grief. But one thing I did learn, and when I took that end of life doula course, you know, I walked into that course thinking, well, I'm an expert in grief. And I soon realized, no, I'm not. I'm an expert in my own grief. Everybody's grief journey is different. And that's the way it is. That's the way it should be. What's right for me isn't right for you, potentially. And my husband and I, we have a good balance. And, but no, like right before Little Matches came out one day, I woke up and I was like, you know, as I said in the beginning, I never wanted to write personal stuff. I really like making things up. And I remember right before the book came out, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? And he said, I've put my personal life out there. And he said, yeah, you have. Like, what have you done? But it's all good. And he is so choked up. Like when I speak in public and he gets to see the audience's reaction and, you know, see real people, real faces. And when he sees the letters and emails I get, he just finds so much meaning and comfort in that himself, because it means so much to him that Caitlin's life is changing lives.
All right, so we've got 4 questions. I think I'm going to take 2 of them. Mary Beth asks, how does one become a death doula? Is there some place to search for information about this?
Yes, I did it through the University of Vermont. There's a group called INELDA, INELDA. You can go there and learn all there is to learn about it. INELDA.
Michelle says, thank you for bringing the different ways of grief processing for everyone. Judgment can be more damaging when people need compassion.
Oh, it's so true.
Susanna says, thank you for sharing Caitlin with us. I feel fortunate to know her a little through your presentation, and I'm eager to read your book. And we'll end on this question. Barbara wants to know, why is the title called Little Matches?
It's from Virginia Woolf, from To the Lighthouse. There's a part toward the end of To the Lighthouse, if you know, where she says, what is the meaning of life? That was all a simple question, one that tended to close in on one with years. There never was the great revelation. Perhaps there never is a great revelation. Instead, there are little illuminations on the way, matches struck in the dark. Paraphrasing, but favorite book of mine and Caitlin's, To the Lighthouse.
So Maryanne, you hang tight. I'm going to come back to you, but I'm going to blab for 30 seconds. So folks, thank you so much for joining us. Want to thank the Friends of the Tewksbury Library and the Corning Foundation for being the primary sponsor for tonight's event. I also want to thank the 10 other libraries who partnered with Tewksbury to help spread the word. I want to thank Wellesley Books for being our official bookstore partner for the event. Look for an email from me tomorrow with a link to a feedback survey, a link to this recording, and a link to Wellesley Books to purchase a copy of Little Matches. In addition, there'll be information in that email about some other upcoming Massachusetts virtual author visits. And Maryanne, do you have any last words for the audience before we wrap up for the evening?
I just want to say thank you to all of you. And I hope in some small way, anyone who might be hurting helps from hearing the story of my beautiful daughter and her resilience. And I hope it inspires you to read the book and to support Wellesley Books and the libraries, of course. One of my biggest thrills was seeing my novel for the first time on a library shelf at Boston Public Library. So thank you for all you do.
Well, thank you, Maryanne. Yeah, thank you so much. And I think so many great messages coming out of tonight's events. I think the biggest takeaway I'm going to have is the love people and be kind. I think we'll end it there. So thank you all so much. Yeah. Thank you, Maryanne. Thank you to the audience. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. Have a great night.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.